Good day. So today I'm going to teach you about quadratic inequalities, a way to memorize them so that you will always get the answers right. So just before I continue, let's deal with something. Whenever you see this stuff, do not interpret it as a is greater than 0. Rather interpret it as a is positive. Or you see this stuff, interpret it as a is negative. Do not interpret it as a is less than 0. Yes, less than 0 is correct, but it's better to interpret it as negative. So in this case, yes, this thing is greater than 0, but then just interpret it as positive for a specific reason. So let's factorize this. So when we factorize this, we factorize normally just like we would have factorized if it was equals to 0. So then this would become x plus 3 and x plus 7. I also deal with the memorizing way of factorizing. I will put that video in the description below. So if you want a shortcut to factorizing this stuff, even if there is a 2 in front, if you want a shortcut to factorize this stuff without really using algebraic methods, then the video will be put in the description below, in the description. So this is greater than 0. Then once we come here, we say critical values. They want it when it's greater than 0, but you are giving them first when it's the values that will cause it to be exactly equals to 0. So always when you're doing inequalities, when you reach the step, critical values. So we're telling them, relax, it's not yet the answer. This is what will cause it to be equals to 0. We're still getting to the answer. So this is not yet the answer. So we reach here, we say critical values. You don't say critical values, you miss a mark there. All right. So then we draw a number line. Okay, why am I writing these numbers? Okay, matter of fact, it's -7. All right. So the smaller value comes there and the larger value comes there. So this thing separates this line into 3 groups, right? So now we have to test anything that is less than -7. We have to substitute that into this equation. For example, I can test -10. So in place of x in the calculator, I will put -10. And then I'll find out whether it's going to be a positive value or a negative value. You type that in a calculator, you will realize that it's actually a positive value. So whenever this group is positive, this side will be negative, that side will be positive. These two groups always agree. Group 1 and group 3 always agree, while this group 2 contradicts them. Right? If this side was a negative, if group 1 was negative, group 2 would be positive, group 3 would be negative. The outer groups always agree, while it's the middle group disagrees. Then what do we do from here? From here, we need to find out which group wins. So according to this, it says that this equation must be positive, right? Greater than 0. So which group is positive? It's group 1 and group 3. Just before I continue, if you want to be tutored, either online or physically, online it doesn't matter where you are or which country you are at, you can still be tutored. So we offer cheap online lessons, and if you want to be tutored physically, we can still make an arrangement. So call or WhatsApp this number, but preferably please WhatsApp this number, and then we will take it from there. So what I do is that I tutor people 5 days a week online, and I give tests once a week so that I can check your improvements. So it means group 1 and group 3 wins. So what do we do when group 1 and group 3 wins? Then we have to now write it down. So whenever group 1 and group 3 wins, I'm not going to deal with the understanding part of it. I'll deal with the cramming part of it. So the cramming part of it, just memorize a rhombus, right? I want you to memorize a rhombus. Just memorize this shape. So whenever group 1 and 3 wins, just memorize this shape. What are you going to use this shape for? You say this, it means you have to write this first, and then that you write it second. You see, you will never get it wrong. You will never make a mistake of writing it like this and like that. You know it has to form a closed shape, right? So the one that comes first is what you put first. The one that comes next is what you put next. And then always write x at the right side at the left side of the inequality sign. On the left side. Then the smaller value, the one that comes first is what you'll put here. The one that comes next is what you put there. You will never go wrong. You'll always get this thing right. You see? So whenever it's a positive, it will always be this shape, irregardless of whether it's the negative, whether the critical values are negative or positive or a fraction. It doesn't matter. If the inequality sign says this thing must be greater than 0, then it will always be this shape. So this thing will come first, this thing will come next. And you just put down your values, the ones that come first, the ones that come next. If you put this one first, you end up getting it wrong. So the ones that come first, the one that comes first, X on the left side of the inequality sign. You'll always get it. Now in the next example, I'm going to show you what if it was a negative one that wins, right? So let's do that. So here it was positive that won because the equation says greater than 0, which is positive. So it was group 1 and group 3. Here is the next activity. So we are given something like this. So when we see that this is squared, this is x squared and this x, we know it's going to be quadratic definitely. So we have to take everything to one side. So then this becomes x squared minus 10x minus 24 is less than 0, right? So it means this whole thing must be negative. So let's factorize. So when we factorize it, we will definitely have a 6 and a 4. Again, you want to learn how to factorize? Well, I told you I put a video in the description below, the way to memorize it. So then here we say critical values. X is equals to 6 or x is equals to 4. And of course, we draw the number line. Then the smaller value comes first and the larger value comes next. Separated into 3 groups. Always make sure it's separated into 3 groups. So of course we have this stuff, and then we have to test anything that is less than 4. So if you test anything that is less than 4, we can even test 0, we can even test 1. So if I test 0, and just to correct something, I realized that this is a negative, meaning that we don't have to look for numbers that add to give you 10. We have to look for numbers that subtract. I have 2 videos that I deal with this, but using the memorizing part will be good. So it means it's going to be minus 12 and plus 2. Yep, just had to fix that. So it means the critical values here, it's now 12 and negative 2. Okay, just a small mistake there, but learning how to factorize. I showed you that here I purely used my brain. I purely used my brain. So when you do this for a long time, you will get used to this stuff. All right, so we have 12 and negative 2. So we put negative 2 here since it's smaller, and then we put 12. Then from here, let's test anything that is less than negative 2. Probably negative 3. Remember, it's not negative 1. Negative 1 is on this side. So probably negative 3 or negative 4, anything. So if I put negative 4 there, it will give me a positive. And if this side is positive, it definitely means this side is negative, this side is positive. Then according to the inequality sign, which one wins, the negative side or the positive? It says this thing must be a negative, less than 0. It means this thing must be a negative. So which group is negative? It's group 2. So it means group 2 wins this time. Now every time group 2 wins, you just copy and paste that. It means you will do this and you will do this. But this time you will not write x on the right side or anything like that. You will write x at the middle, and you'll put the smaller value there and the larger value there. You just need to cram it. If it was positive, then you use that parallelogram, which is the rhombus, and you would write it like that, right? And then you put x there and x there, and the smaller number then the higher value there. But if it's the negative one that wins, it means that you will instead put x in the middle, right? You will just copy and paste what was there. You just copy and paste. You put x in the middle, then the smaller values there, the larger values there. There is no other situation. You will always have this, right? So this is where it ends. You get full 4 marks there. Here is another one. So we're given something like this. So what do we do? So we know that this thing must be a positive. But since we have a negative x squared, we cannot factorize with a negative x squared. So we have to divide everything by negative. You divide this by negative, it becomes a positive. Divide by negative, it becomes a positive. Then the sign of the inequality will change. Every time you divide or multiply by negative, the sign of the inequality does change. So now we're no more dealing with greater than 0 or positive. Now we're dealing with less than 0 or negative. So now let's factorize it. So what do we do if there is no constant, if we don't have something like plus 6 at the end? Well, it's easy to factorize this. This becomes easier. You just find the highest common factor, which is x. Then you divide it, you have x there, you divide this, you have minus 5 less or equals to 0. So that's what we have. Then from here, it means x is equals to, so critical values. So x is equals to 0 or x is equals to 5. Right? X is equals to 0 or x equals to 5. So whenever we have this situation, this one becomes equals to 0, the one that is inside the bracket becomes equal to the opposite side. So the opposite sign of it, right? So now the smaller value comes first, the bigger value comes next. So I separated it into 3 groups. So what do I do when I have this? So now I have to test anything that is less than 0, probably -1 or even -2. So if I test it, this time I won't test it in the original equation because I did manipulate it so that I can have this. So this time we'll ignore the original equation. We'll now use this. So we'll now use this, right? So when I test it there, I will get a positive. So it's going to be positive. And of course, if this is positive, this is going to be negative, and this is going to be positive. And I think you realize that by now, I'm sure by now you realize that we'll always have positive, negative, positive. Because even though we have a negative, we will still change it into a positive x squared. If it was a negative x squared, we will actually have negative, positive, negative. But then every time we have a negative, we still divide so that we can have a positive x squared. So when you always make sure x squared is positive, it means it will always be like this. You don't even have to bother testing. It will always be positive, negative, positive. It will not change. Then according to this, remember we changed this equation into this. So this one that I ticked is what we're looking at now. According to this, must this be a positive or a negative? It must be a negative because it's less than 0. Which group wins? The middle group wins. So if the middle group wins, remember you just copy and paste. So it means we just copy and paste and write x in the middle. The smaller value there, the higher value there. You're done. Full marks. Here is another situation. So what do we do here? So we have this stuff. So now this is x squared and x. We know that it's a quadratic equation, so everything has to go to one side. So then we'll have -2x plus 5x plus 3, because it was a -3, is less or equals to 0. The sign of the inequality does not change when we transpose things. But when we divide or multiply by a negative, that's when the sign of the inequality changes. So we don't want to have negative in front of x squared. So what do? Divide everything by negative. So it means when you divide this by negative, it's now a positive. Divide by negative, you have negative. Divide that one by negative, you have negative. And then the sign of the inequality changes. So this becomes that. So we're no more looking at that. Now we're looking at this. So it means this must be a positive. It must be greater than 0. So let's factorize. Let's solve it. Okay, this is going to be 2x. And since it's a minus, this is going to be it's gonna be what? It's gonna be a 3 and a 1. So yep, it's gonna be -3 and +1. Yep, that's what we have. So 2 times 3 is -6 plus 1 is -5. Yeah, it's correct. But remember, in the video, if you click the video below, you will know how to do this without really thinking about the numbers. So from here, we now see critical values. 2x is equals to -1 or x is equals to 3. And then it means when we divide both sides by 2 here, x is equals to -½ right? Because we can't really have 2x. We have to have x as the subject of the formula. So now I draw the number line as usual, separated into 3 groups. Then I put the lower value there and the higher value there. Okay, what if this was a +½ and this was a +3? If you have a fraction and you don't know which one is bigger, you just type the fraction in the calculator and convert it to decimal places so that you can see which number is bigger and which one is smaller. So from here, we know obviously it's going to be a positive, negative, positive, right? But you can test it. If I test anything less than half, probably, let's say I test -1. It will give me a positive here, and this side will be a negative, that side will be a positive. And now we need to find out which group wins. So this must be positive, right? Greater than 0. Which group is positive? It's group 1 and group 3. And remember, on group 1 and group 3 wins, it's that parallelogram. Not that you have to show them that, it's just a way of memorizing. So it means this one must come first and this one must come next. See, that's what we do there. So it means we put x here and of course x here, right? And then from there, the lower value first and the higher value next. There, full marks. So I hope you crammed those things, right? I hope you crammed it. There is something though that you need to know apart from those. So those ones that you cram usually come out. There is something that is gonna be a little bit new, an extra thing that you have to cram. So let me bring it on. So when you see an equation like this, there's gonna be a little bit of a problem with it. What is the problem with it? All right, let's factorize. So when we factorize, we will have x plus 1 and x plus 1 again. So basically, our critical value is only one answer. So it's x equals to -1. So how will you put this in the number line? Well, in the number line, we will only have one critical value. So the number line is separated into two, right? Now, when you test -1 in there, you will realize that it will give you positive everywhere. It will literally be positive, right? Whenever we have only one answer in quadratic inequalities, it's either going to be positive everywhere or negative everywhere, except at the critical value where it's equals to 0, right? I'm not saying you must do it like this. This is just for understanding. So, but I'm just throwing the 0 to remind you that this side is going to be equals to 0. So everywhere else that I showed you before, you crammed it like that, it stays like that. But now whenever you have only one answer, the group splits into two, and it will either be positive everywhere or negative everywhere. That's the situation. And then according to this, it says we want the group that is positive or equals to 0. It's actually everything. So what will you say? You'll just say x is an element of real numbers. So x is everything. Here is another example of it. So when you factorize it, this is x minus 1, x minus 1. So again, we have got one answer, critical values, x is equals to 1. So on the number line, it's split into 2 this time, so x is equals to 1. So we know definitely, if we test this thing, if you put -1 there, you'll see it's going to be positive everywhere. You just have to test any number, right? Test any number except the critical value. So I can test 0, I can test -1. So if you test any number in this group, you will see it's a positive. And if we get positive, it's going to be a positive everywhere. That's the thing. So if we have quadratic inequalities and we have only one critical value, it's either it's positive everywhere or negative everywhere, except at the critical value where it's equals to 0. Now here they said we want the one that is positive only. They didn't say positive or equals to 0. So it means this part has to be excluded. So how do you write this? You'll just say x is less than 1 or x is greater than 1. That's how you'll do it. So if it's greater or equals to 0, then you will include everything. But if it's greater than 0 only, then you will just write x must be less than this, or x must be greater than this. So it's simple. Yeah, so here's the parallelogram method again. If you notice, it's that thing, that robust method. This came first, right? But now we write the critical value twice. So that's how it will be, right? So if we have only one answer, the parallelogram method comes in again, and then we just write x on our left side, x on our left side, and then we write this first. So that's how it's done. But if they say it greater or equals to 0 and it's only one answer, then everything is included, because greater than 0 means positive, and also the 0 part is included, so we have to include everything. But in this case, it's only greater, so it means the 0 part is not included. That's why we have to split it into two groups. Yeah, so you just cram it. It will only be like this. Other than this, you will have no other form of inequalities, of quadratic inequalities. If you follow these steps, you will always get it right.